imagine you found that perfect piece of land, ideal for your next big project. You're envisioning the future. Blueprints are taking shape. But then a critical detail emerges. There are wetlands nearby. For any developer, this immediately shifts the entire landscape of the project. It's not just about what you want to build, but navigating, well, a complex, vital regulatory framework.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today, what a developer must do when building near wetlands. Our mission here is to, cut through the complexity, extract the most important actionable insights from the regulations themselves, give you a clear roadmap, really, from that initial site assessment all the way to final compliance. We'll explore the definitions, the permits, the detailed plans, even the financial stakes involved. So, let's get started.
Okay, so let's begin at the beginning then. When we talk about wetlands in this regulatory sense, what precisely are we defining? It's more nuanced than just, a patch of soggy ground, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The regulations define wetlands as areas that are, inundated or saturated by surface water or groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. So think swamps, marshes, bogs. What's critical is the scientific method for identifying them.
Right.
You're looking for specific signs hydric soils, which are, soils formed under saturated conditions. Then there's hydrophytic vegetation plants adapted to wet environments, and particular hydrological conditions that confirm that long-term presence of water. These precise ecological parameters are really key to their legal recognition and protection.
It's fascinating how much emphasis is placed on these areas beyond the obvious environmental benefits. What's maybe the overlooked practical insight for developers about why local governments are so invested, perhaps in a way that directly impacts, project viability?
Well, it's not just abstract environmental concern. Local governments are often mandated by acts like the Georgia Planning Act of 1989. The regulations are fundamentally about protecting public health and welfare. And from a practical standpoint, wetlands are like natural infrastructure.
Natural infrastructure,
Yeah.
How so?
Well, they protect water quality by filtering pollutants. They provide essential wildlife habitats. And critically, they store floodwaters. Ignoring them can lead to, potentially devastating downstream flooding, maybe compromised water supplies, public health issues, things that then become a huge public cost. So acknowledging and protecting them up front is kind of a proactive investment in community resilience and, frankly, avoiding future costs.
Okay, let's get really practical. You've just acquired a promising piece of land, and there's a whisper of wetlands. Maybe you saw something on a map, maybe just visually. What's the very first non-negotiable step a developer absolutely must take before any earth is moved?
Right. This is where, honestly, many developers can trip up. It's all about getting a jurisdictional wetlands determination. And here's the critical insight, the thing to really remember. While there might be a generalized wetlands map available from the city, often from the National Wetlands Inventory.
Okay, I've seen those.
Yeah, they're useful starting points. But it's absolutely crucial to understand that this map does not necessarily represent the actual boundaries of jurisdictional wetlands. It is not a substitute for a determination approved by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or COE.
The COE.
Exactly. I've actually seen cases where a developer, maybe trying to save time or money, relied only on that generalized map, only to discover later, after, significant investment in design, that their entire planned footprint was within a jurisdictional wetland. Well, that's a costly lesson in getting that COE determination right and early.
So the city's general map isn't legally binding, only the COE determination counts. That sounds like a potentially significant hurdle. What's the biggest misconception developers often have about that initial determination? And if wetlands are found, is it generally seen as a project killer or just a new set of challenges?
Well, the biggest misconception is often that finding wetlands automatically means the project is dead. That's actually rarely the case. Instead, it triggers a core principle: avoidance and mitigation.
Avoidance first, then mitigation.
Exactly. Developers should first exhaust all options to avoid altering or degrading wetlands. You have to demonstrate that any proposed activity will result in no long-term impacts or a net loss of wetlands. If degradation or loss is genuinely unavoidable, meaning there's just no practicable alternative, then it must be mitigated.
Okay, and mitigation means?
It could involve restoring existing wetlands, creating new ones, enhancing some, or preserving other waters, preferably within the same city, unless the COE directs otherwise based on watershed needs, maybe. So it's a challenge, yes, but it's more of a design and planning redirection than an outright project killer. It's about maintaining that overall ecological integrity.
So once you have that COE determination, whether it says you have wetlands or not, what about getting the local green light for your project? How do these federal requirements feed into the local permits?
Right. A local land disturbance permit is central to pretty much any development activity that involves moving dirt. Now, if the COE determines that a federal permit is required for your activity involving wetlands, maybe a Wetlands 4004 permit under the Clean Water Act, or maybe an NPDES permit for stormwater discharge to make sure your runoff meets federal standards, then the local land disturbance permit will only be issued after that federal approval has been granted. It's a critical sequencing step. Federal compliance always comes first for these sensitive areas. You can't get the local permit without the federal one if it's needed.
Now let's talk about the nuts and bolts. Once those initial wetland statuses are clear, what kind of detailed plans and construction practices are required to keep everything compliant on the ground?
Okay, so once those initial steps are clear, developers need to submit several key plans. A foundational one is the Erosion, Sedimentation, and Pollution Control Plan. And this isn't just some thick document you file away. It has to include specific best management practices, or BMPs.
Right.
These are essentially precise engineering and conservation techniques designed specifically to minimize erosion and keep sediment out of waterways. And the regulations are quite clear. Proper design, installation, and maintenance of these BMPs are considered a complete legal defense against non-compliance. Follow the manual, basically, and you're covered.
Can you give us some practical examples of these crucial BMPs? What do they actually look like on a construction site?
Absolutely. The Manual for Erosion and Sediment Control in Georgia, that's the key reference here, it provides really comprehensive guidance. Key practices include things like minimizing the stripping of vegetation and regrading. That immediately reduces exposed soil. Keeping cut-fill operations to a minimum, less earth moved, less erosion potential. Designing development plans to conform to the natural topography and soil type. Working with the land, not against it.
Makes sense.
Retaining natural vegetation wherever feasible. Established plans are powerful natural erosion control, right? And maybe most importantly, stabilizing any disturbed soil as quickly as practicable. Don't leave bare earth exposed for long. For exposed critical areas, you might use temporary vegetation or mulching. Then get permanent vegetation and structural erosion control measures like sediment basins installed swiftly. Critically, any sediment in runoff water must be trapped by devices like silt traps or sediment ponds until the disturbed area is fully stabilized. These are mandatory, not optional suggestions.
What about working directly near existing water bodies, like streams or creeks? Are there specific rules about how close you can build or disturb the land there?
Yes, very specific and often quite stringent rules. The ordinance establishes a 25-foot undisturbed buffer along the banks of all state waters. And that isn't just a suggestion, it's measured horizontally from where vegetation has been naturally rested by normal stream flow or wave action, basically the top of the bank.
Okay, a 25-foot no-touch zone.
Pretty much. That buffer must remain in a natural state. The goal is to protect water quality and aquatic habitat. You can't just fill these areas either. Fills are explicitly not allowed to encroach upon natural watercourses. Even things like grading equipment, crossing flowing streams, they have to use temporary or permanent bridges or culverts and keep those crossings to an absolute minimum.
Wow, okay.
And if you happen to be near a small water supply watershed, an area feeding drinking water sources, the requirements get even tougher. We're talking a 100-foot undisturbed buffer and an additional 50-foot impervious setback beyond that.
Impervious setback, meaning no pavement, no buildings.
Exactly. No impervious surfaces like buildings or pavement are allowed in that setback zone. It really does raise the question, how do you balance the critical need for development with such stringent protections for our water resources?
It definitely sounds like a tightrope walk.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what's the biggest shift in mindset developers need to make when approaching projects near wetlands today compared to, say, 20 years ago? Especially regarding that initial planning phase.
I think the biggest shift is the absolute necessity of upfront integrated planning by a qualified design professional. 20 years ago, maybe the approach was more like design the project, then react to any environmental findings later, patch it up. Today, environmental considerations, especially wetlands, they have to be at the foundation of the design process right from the start.
So not an afterthought?
Not at all. These professionals, licensed engineers, landscape architects, etc., they must sign and seal all the maps and drawings. They're taking legal responsibility for accuracy and compliance. They need to thoroughly consider the interplay of soil types, hydrology, topography, existing vegetation, all from day one. This includes submitting a detailed stormwater management plan, how will runoff be handled after development, and a comprehensive landscape plan, too. That landscape plan needs to specifically identify areas of tree preservation within protected zones, including wetlands. So yeah, that initial design phase is where environmental responsibility isn't just an add-on, it's an intrinsic part of creating value.
Okay, beyond all these detailed environmental rules and planning requirements, there are significant financial implications for developers too, right? It's not just about getting the process right, but about the actual costs involved.
Absolutely. Developers will typically incur development impact fees, particularly for public facilities related to things like stormwater collection, retention, and disposal systems needed because of the new development.
And when are those fees paid?
These fees are generally collected at the time the land disturbance permit is issued, so it's an upfront cost before major work begins. The calculation is based on a proportionate share of the cost of public facilities needed to serve that new growth. It uses adopted levels of service for public facilities and designated service areas. Now, developers do have some flexibility here. They can either pay according to a standardized fee schedule, or they can request an individual assessment based on their project's specific impact. This flexibility can sometimes lead to adjustments, based on unique project circumstances. But the principle is ensuring new development pays its fair share for the infrastructure it demands.
Makes sense. And what happens if a developer, doesn't follow these detailed rules and plans? What are the teeth behind these regulations?
Non-compliance. Well, it can lead to serious and often immediate consequences, both financial and operational. Penalties can include monetary fines up to $2,500 per day per violation. That can add up very quickly.
Wow, per day.
Per day. In severe or persistent cases, it can even lead to the revocation of a business license to operate within the city. That's obviously a major blow. For initial, maybe less severe violations, an official notice is usually posted, giving the developer 5 days or so to correct the issue, a chance to fix it. However, an immediate stop work order can be issued if the violation presents an imminent threat to public health or state waters, or simply if land-disturbing activities are being done without getting the necessary permit in the first place.
So they can shut the whole site down instantly.
Instantly. And critically, failing to properly design, install, or maintain those best management practices we talked about, or failing to maintain a required stream buffer, that can also trigger an immediate stop work order. The city also has the authority to use any bond the developer posted, which is a common requirement before getting a permit to go in and stabilize the site themselves, to bring it into compliance if the developer fails to do so.
Okay, so they can use the developer's money to fix the developer's mistakes.
Essentially, yes. That bond serves as financial assurance.
So what really stands out to you about how compliance is enforced throughout the entire project lifecycle? It sounds like it's far from just a one-time check at the beginning.
You're exactly right. The continuous nature of the oversight is paramount. It's not just get the permit and you're good to go. Licensed professionals, or their approved reps, they're required to inspect the initial installation of all those erosion control measures and correct any deficiencies within just a couple of business days. Very quick turnaround.
Okay.
Beyond that initial setup, biweekly reports are typically required. These detail the quality and progress of the work, adherence to environmental practices, basically ongoing status checks. These reports must be submitted from the beginning of grading right through until construction completion. And then the ultimate gatekeeper is the final project approval. That includes the certificate of occupancy, which you need to legally use the building.
The C of O, right.
Exactly. That will be withheld until as-built drawings, prepared by a licensed professional, have been submitted and accepted by the director. These as-builts prove that what was actually built fully complies with the approved plans. So it's a sustained, documented process of accountability from breaking ground right through to the very end.
Given all these really strict requirements, is there any wiggle room? Are there pathways for developers to get some flexibility if unique circumstances pop up? Can they seek variances or exceptions?
Yes, there are mechanisms for flexibility, but they aren't easy loopholes. Variances can be granted, but only for specific circumstances. The bar is usually that strict adherence to the regulations would cause unnecessary hardship, and that granting the variance wouldn't undermine the overall intent of the ordinance. A written request is required, detailing the specific variance sought and providing strong, supporting reasons why it's needed and justified.
What counts as hardship?
Well, there are specific criteria. For instance, if the property has a genuinely unusual shape or topography that existed before the ordinance was adopted, making it impossible to develop under the standard rules, Or perhaps if a structure, by its very nature, must be located within a buffer. Think of something like a dam or maybe a necessary utility crossing or a dock. It has to be essential.
Okay. And how do these variances work? Are they all decided the same way, or are there different tiers, maybe?
There are indeed different levels, typically. You might have a level 1 variance. This could be subject to the planning director's decision, for example. It might allow for a relatively minor reduction, say a maximum of 15 feet from a setback, or maybe 25 feet from an undisturbed buffer. It could even, in some cases, permit stormwater facilities within the undisturbed buffer area, though usually not in FEMA flood zones, without separate FEMA approval.
So smaller adjustments. What about bigger deviations?
For broader or more significant deviations, there's often a secondary variance. This is typically a hardship-based appeal that goes to a body like the Zoning Board of Appeals. This pathway is for more substantial requests that really require a higher level of review, often including public input and a more formal hearing process.
And if a decision goes against a developer, maybe a variance is denied or they get hit with a stop work order they disagree with, do they have any recourse then? What's the appeal process look like?
Yes, developers do have avenues for recourse. Decisions like stop work orders or the suspension, revocation, or even a conditional grant of a permit, those can typically be appealed. Often, the first step is an appeal to the city council, maybe within 30 days of the decision. This gives an administrative review by elected officials.
Okay.
If all those administrative remedies are exhausted and the developer still feels the decision was wrong, an appeal can then be made to the Superior Court. That provides a formal judicial pathway for review. So, yes, developers do have formal channels to challenge decisions they believe are unfair or incorrect. It ensures due process.
So wrapping this up, when you're looking at a piece of land near a wetland, it's crystal clear it's not just about what you want to build anymore. It's really about how you can build it responsibly and within a pretty robust regulatory framework. It truly sounds like a dance between development goals and environmental stewardship.
Indeed. And I think it's important to remember these regulations are meticulously designed. They aim to protect invaluable natural resources like wetlands and streams, all while still allowing for necessary and hopefully responsible development. The consistent thread we've seen throughout these ordinances is that careful upfront planning, proactive engagement with certified professionals, and strict ongoing adherence to environmental safeguards. These aren't just bureaucratic hurdles. They're actually essential investments in successful, sustainable development for the entire community.
And that leaves us with perhaps a provocative thought for everyone listening. As our communities continue to grow and expand, how can we foster a mindset among developers, policymakers, even the public? A mindset that not only minimizes negative impacts on our vital wetlands, but actively seeks ways to enhance and restore these crucial natural systems, turning potential obstacles into genuine opportunities for ecological benefit, ensuring these resources are healthy for future generations. Something to think about.